Can we do it? Is it possible now with our country so divided? Is it possible that we could have a reunited States of America? Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. I am Chris Gore. I am pleased to have on our show today documentary filmmaker Ben Rekhi is here. He is the man behind a film that I saw recently, which blew my mind. And I because I've been saying we need a movie like this right now more than ever. It's called The Reunited States, and this is a really a documentary that could not be timed even any better based on what's happening in the world. I mean, if you watch the news, everything is terrible, and we're never going to be able to get along. And I think especially if you look at social media. It's distressing to see how each side has dehumanized the other. I'm pretty politically middle of the road. And I tend to vote for who is the less crazy. And we've gone through periods where one party or the other was crazier. Now I think both batshit sides seem to be the only sides that are amplified are the ones that have gone in directions that are just too far for me. Where did this project come from? It's produced, and Van Jones was involved, as well as Meghan McCain. They're on opposite political sides of the aisle. And with that long introduction, Ben, now I really want to talk to you about this doc because I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think that people need to see this movie now. It's so important. How did this project get started?
Well, first, Chris, I'm a big fan of your work and have been, a film threat lover for a while. So excited to talk to all the listeners here. I'm a fan myself. The documentary first came about. I had done a short project for PBS called The Hidden Vote that profiled minorities who support Trump. And we had an episode about LGBT for Trump and Native Americans for Trump and Muslims for Trump. And it really opened my eyes to the complexity and different perspectives across the political spectrum, that it's not so easy to put people into just red or blue categories. And that led me to this project. I was in an event where Susan Bro, the mother of Heather Heyer in Charlottesville, who was killed when the car drove through the crowd, was speaking. And she talked about the need to work through our differences. And it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks, because a lot of us were emotional in 2016 after the election, whether you were, terrified or ecstatic about it. It was a new reality. And she was able to talk about the need to work through our differences. And here was someone who had lost a child on the front lines of division, willing to say, we need to work through this and be a voice of reason. And I was moved, and I went up to her and I said, I don't know how or why, but I want to be a part of telling your story. And after, some convincing and even some background checks, she allowed us to. And that's sort of what kicked it off. Was the first shot of the movie is the first day of filming, when we went to the anniversary of Charlottesville and got a deep dive look at her work and what she's doing.
Well, I want to thank you for your approach on this documentary for a very specific reason. I see a lot of documentaries that come into Film Threat, a lot. And I don't know that I could hardly call many of these documentaries in the sense that they so come with a preloaded agenda that this is, say, a right-wing documentary. And this documentary is very on the left, and each one seems to ignore any sort of sense of objectivity, right? It's like, I've got my premise, I know what I'm trying to say, and I'm just going to ignore anything else. What I really love about how you approach this is you're willing to listen to both sides, and you travel around the country and you document some really profound conversations with people. Can you talk about that and what you found in your travels in speaking to people for the doc?
Yeah, the idea of leaning left or leaning right in the creative process, I think that's a nature of our own upbringing and our own implicit belief systems, that we've basically told ourselves that we're on the right side of history or of an issue. And so a lot of the times we don't even know that were advocating, in a way that might be detrimental by painting an entire, group of opposition as the enemy. Both sides think that they're trying to save democracy and save the country, and that the other side is destroying it. I mean, conservatives feel that way about liberals, and liberals feel that way about conservatives. So that was my journey too. I went into this thinking, how do we tell a story that proves that liberals are right? But I very quickly realized that in order to reach the broadest audience, and if we were serious about inviting everyone into the conversation, we had to quickly modulate that. And so finding characters that represented, we have some characters on the left, Susan Bro, who still identifies as an independent, and some characters on the right. You talked about traveling the country. The Levertons, this Republican family who traveled in their RV, I was, introduced to them by the author of the book, Mark Gerzon, inspired the book, The Reunited States, How to Bridge the Partisan Divide. And I was struck by the fact that they, just in short, like his story was David Leverton used to work in Republican politics and was fomenting kind of division to win elections. And then when 2016 came around and saw violence breaking out around the country, he felt incredibly responsible that he had played a role in reaching this crisis level in violence. And his wife turned to him and said, look, if we didn't have kids and we didn't have a mortgage, what would you want to do with your life? And without thinking, he said, I'd want to bring unity back to this country. And so they thought about it and walked it out and ended up selling their house, buying an RV, and traveling to all 50 states in order to find out what divides us with their 3 kids. And it's this incredible story of this evangelical family from Texas that goes into border towns and Black communities and Native reservations and realizes that their version of America is not the same as every other version. And it's a story of healing and vulnerability and saying, we want to understand what your story, American story is. And they hear some of the most heartbreaking things. And so just to be a fly on that wall, and you might not meet someone who's been through this struggle, but just the power of cinema is that it puts you in the front row to the human condition. And so we hope that their journey and what transformed them might also be helpful to the rest of us.
Well, I just really appreciate this approach and how you really humanized all of this. I just don't know where we went from 2016, right, where families were torn apart. I mean, my family, we voted Republican, we voted Democrat. It's like I say, who is the less crazy, right? Sometimes it's based on policy for me, but I've never thought I'm going to cast someone out. I have a very close friend who's such a strong Trump supporter, right? I'm not going to cast my friends away who I may not agree with. I'm not a fan of Trump, but I don't hate everyone who supports him. I think that's a danger. That's a slippery slope. I jokingly say, just because comes from being a nerd, I always try to say to my friends, it's like Luke Skywalker never canceled Darth Vader, right? Luke Skywalker didn't try to do. Luke Skywalker turn Darth Vader to the good side. And the only way to keep that connection is just to keep that conversation going and to not to stop this dangerous path. And I see it on both sides. People just dehumanizing the other side. I haven't read the book. I've seen your documentary, but what can you tell me that was in the book that maybe you might have wanted to include? I mean, the documentary is like 90 minutes. It's a tight 90 minutes. Great job, by the way. But what just because I don't read books these days. I'm very well. I listen to audiobooks, a lot of them. Yeah. But what can you tell me from the book that kind of informed your approach for the doc, but then things that obviously you couldn't include for time reasons?
Yeah, sure. So Mark Gerzon, who wrote the book, has been working on these issues of bridging the divide for 30 years. And it was only in the past 4 or 5 or 6 years that it really became urgent for this wisdom became very important for the rest of us to understand. And one of the things that he framed is, the end of the Cold War, the moment that Gorbachev and Reagan shook hands and we lost our external superpower enemy, that animosity had to go somewhere, and it turned inwards, and we turned our fellow countrymen into enemies. And if you look at the polarization charts of when it started to really take off, it really was the early 90s at the end of the Cold War. And now we're at this fever pitch where we're actually at war with ourselves. And, just the first month of this year, we've had an insurrection, an impeachment, and an inauguration in the midst of a global pandemic while the economy's in free fall. I mean, these are extraordinary shifts that we're undergoing right now, and it's going to take years to comprehend. And I guess you asked about the book, and what was the other big takeaway that we tried to incorporate in the film is that it's very easy to look at polarization and say, those people are causing the problem. It's their fault. They're being unreasonable. But the truth is, we're all a part of this. Every single one of us is either uniting or dividing every single day, depending on our thoughts, words, and actions towards the other side. And that's a radically different shift. It goes from being hopeless and saying our government's in gridlock, what can I do, to saying every conversation I have, everything I post on social media, everything I do is a choice. And I'm either throwing gas on the fire or I'm trying to diffuse tensions. And so I really admire you, Chris, for being able to separate your views about an elected official and everyone who supported them, because that's one of the distinctions that is important for all of us to make. Just because you supported a president or a leader that, I might not agree with doesn't mean you're a bad person. And that's one of the first steps to reaching across the aisle.
Well, I think, you pointed it out. Social media is like gasoline on the fire. And I took a hard look at myself, and I looked at my social media feed. Normally what I try to do is I like to live tweet the debates. I've never missed a presidential debate since I was a kid. I'm just obsessed with presidential politics on a national scale. It's that horse race I find fascinating. But I found myself, usually when I tweet during a debate, it's trying to be funny. I'm just trying to be funny, not succeeding very often. But I really kind of took a hard look at my own self on social media and said, am I really contributing to the conversation? Am I really and I took a step back, and same thing with my friend I told you about, who's a big Trump. He's always sending me memes, but I don't want to shut that conversation down, because I want that open line of communication, because I feel like we all have to get through this. In fact, I think what you're doing with this documentary is the most important thing we have to be focusing on, because we are never going to solve the biggest problems of our time. We're not going to solve the pandemic. We're not going to solve, the growing class disparity. We're not going to solve climate change. We're not going to solve any of these bigger issues unless we learn to talk to each other respectfully, and we still can't do it. Social media has now become an Xbox Call of Duty game live where we're fighting with each other. I'm trying to make these pop culture references. I want people listening or watching this, however you're consuming this. I'm in your ears or you're watching this video. I want you to be reminded of all of this. And I do think that I am really concerned about the division, all the ethnic division, and trying to divide us by race and this and whatever, and you're classified into all these different categories. And I'm going to throw out another nerd reference, Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon, the comic strip from the 1930s, which was a Buster Crabbe cereal in the 30s and 40s, which is also a movie with Sam Jones in the 80s, is about a totalitarian, authoritarian leader trying to keep people divided by all of these simple things. You've got the Hawkmen, the Lizardmen, the Lionmen. They're all separated and fighting amongst their little kingdoms about their physical differences between each other, right? They're sort of simple, differences, and Ming keeps them fighting to not notice that he's the real enemy. Wow. And I kind of feel like I'm serious. Go back and watch Flash Gordon.
Yeah, actually I am. No, I didn't draw that comparison.
Well, Alex Raymond, who did the comic book, way back the original comic strip from the 30s, I believe was a warning about Hitler and fascism.
Oh, wow.
Ming the Merciless. And then it's pretty, Hitler was a racist. He was, this is not
no one disputes that. Yeah.
Not a controversial thing to say. But what I'm saying is that a lot of this stuff in nerd fiction that I tend to like, I see it and I'm like, stop fighting amongst each other. It's just people trying to distract us from the real things we need to be concerned about. So what you've done with this documentary, I can't emphasize this enough, is the most important. You need to be making sequels to this or a series, or it needs to continue, because it's the most important issue of our time. Is just because I've seen so many documentaries and they're like, they take this approach or they take this approach. I've never, and what you did is taking the objective approach. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. I'm just very excited.
No, well, what you said is true, and it's sort of what a lot of the people that are gravitating towards this bridging movement, you know, whatever you call it, cross-partisan, have come to the same realization. They came in through some activist viewpoint and hit a brick wall and realized that that wall is our inability to talk to one another. And so they said, we need to get rid of this wall before we can even move forward. And so, you know, one of the taglines that we've been kicking around is, you know, how can we even talk until we learn to listen again? And it's the same idea, which is there's a lot of issues we need to talk about, but first we need to hear each other. And I agree with you. I think, you know, the other realization is that it took us 15 or 20 or 30 years to get into this rut, and it may take us as long to get out. And so the sooner that we start doing this, and I say that not to give anyone despair, but to say, okay, maybe this is our Cold War. And I remember growing up and having to hide under the desk if there was like a nuclear threat or something like that. And it was just there in the background. It wasn't like this daily thing. And so I think we need to take the long view and say, how did we get here? Why do big parts of the country feel like this country doesn't work for them anymore? And there's lots of communities who felt like this country never worked for them anymore. So that seems like an area of common ground. Why won't we start there? Like, this is all coming from a place of pain, and pain is one of the biggest things that unites us. Is we all have been through pain, and that leads to anger and fear and hate. So let's get to the bottom of it. Let's stop fighting about policy and start to see each other as humans and say, like, where did this come from? And so I kind of, one of the things I do, it sounds like you do as well, is instead of trying to change someone's mind going into a conversation, I just go into interview mode and say, that's interesting. How did you arrive at that? What happened? And just keep going. Even though sometimes my blood is boiling about some of the things I'm hearing, I'm just letting go of all judgment, because I used to say and do things that I'm embarrassed about race, about, you know, things I didn't understand. And I've come a long way in my own journey. So why would I shame someone else who isn't at the same place on their journey? I think part of what we see on the left is just this relentless cancel culture that is actually maybe potentially making people run from the conversation instead of inviting them in. Right. And so, you know, one of the other stories in the film that embodies this is Stephen Olakara, who runs the Millennial Action Project. Yeah. And his whole idea was like, can we build a coalition of young lawmakers from Republicans and Democrats who are committed to bridge building and are under 40, and, or at least in the spirit of, you know, youth and millennial action. And he now has 1,500 lawmakers around the country, from state legislatures, state congresses, and at the federal level, that are actually working on bipartisan solutions to things like gun control and immigration. And they're young. They're coming at this with, we don't want the labels of the past. We want to find a new way of doing things. And you think about that coming of age and where they can actually have an impact in government. It's really exciting. There are solutions. We're just not highlighting them because they're not clickbait.
Well, I appreciate what you just said. And earlier, I'm not sure when you said anger, fear, hate, you might have been quoting Yoda from Star Wars. I want to make sure people can find your film, The Reunited States. Is there a website? On VOD? Give me all the particulars.
Yes. So it releases on February 9th on Tuesday across Amazon, iTunes, On Demand, Comcast, everywhere. You know, Van Jones and Megan McCain, like you said, have come on board as executive producers. They're doing a lot of, I mean, helping to amplify this, and it's so meaningful that they're out there, you know, embodying this message. The website reunitedstates.tv, we're actually launching that will be more solutions based, where you can learn to talk to your family and your friends that you disagree with. And we did it in conjunction with the Braver Angels and stick figures to say, like, here's what to say, here's what not to say, because so many of us have lost family members or friends or coworkers over political conversations, and it's just tragic. And if we don't repair that at the personal level, how on earth are we going to do it at the national level? So the last thing I'll say on the release side is that we have planned this launch event called the Red and Blue Carpet Premiere. And Van Jones and Megan are going to make appearances there and talk, as well as the cast and a few other sort of surprise guests. And that's happening on February 11th. So anyone, we're opening it up to the public. It's reunitedstates.tv/premiere. go ahead and sign up, and we'd love to see you there. This is going to be a special event amplifying all these issues.
That's great. Van Jones, I've always been a big fan of him. I'll say that I think that this is almost a separate conversation, but I feel like almost the format of mainstream media makes it impossible to have this conversation. Yeah. Meaning these little tight segments with 4 people, you've got a topic. And I saw Van Jones versus Ann Coulter at Politicon, Politicon in Pasadena. They had it here a couple times. And, in fact, I did a panel there, actually, believe it or not. Wow. Yeah, I did a panel there called
the bridge building of Star Wars?
No, not that. I did a panel called All the President's Movies, where I talked about the history of the White House movie theater. Oh, wow. And then I did another panel called Trump the Motion Picture, how Hollywood would approach. And I took it very seriously, and I got some friends of mine who work in development in television, film and television, and I got them to appear on a panel to talk about, okay, Trump is eventually going to have some movies made about him. How would it actually be produced? Who would play him? And how would it be marketed when half the country hates him and half the country's in love with him? So anyways, just my point is that Van Jones Unplugged, I think, is amazing. And I'd love to see some of these political figures that you see them for just a few minutes on MSNBC or CNN or Fox or whatever, and they barely get a chance because of the format to talk. I think what you've done with this documentary is the beginning of the kind of conversation we need to have. And right. Ben, I can't thank you enough. The minute that I heard about your movie, I said, I have to talk to you. So I want to thank you, and Summer. I want to thank everybody involved for helping to make this happen.
Thanks, Chris.
February 9th, the Reunited States is out. It's on all video on demand platforms. Check it out. February 11th is the red and blue carpet event. Ben, this will not be the last time we have a conversation because I'm sure you're working on something else, or you should just come back for no reason whatsoever. I think that would be fun.
No, I love it. I mean, you're a bridge builder, Chris. I had no idea. So I'd love to talk about other conversations we could have. So please, let's continue it.
Awesome. Okay, Ben, thanks again. I really appreciate you being on the Film Threat podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it. Take care.